And he just told us one day, if you want a relationship when he's 30, you've got to stop fighting him. He knows every area that you disagree with him on. You raised him in such a way that he knows what your passions are. He knows what you hold dear. He knows exactly where you disagree with him. You never, ever have to tell him that again. And that was a changing point in our relationship.
Welcome to the Riverside Project Podcast. We are mobilizing Houston to empower families and transform generations. We hope these conversations will give you a greater understanding of the issues facing our community and inspire you to find your place along the river. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Riverside Project Podcast. Today we have Julie Etter. If you listened to a previous episode with Isaac Etter, this is Julie, Isaac's mom. Julie is an adoptive mom. She and her husband have 5 children, 2 adopted and 3 biological. Julie shares her lived experience with transracial adoptions and the ups and downs her family has experienced. Julie's a beloved speaker on this topic. As a history teacher by trade, Julie loves to read, finding anything about history very fascinating. Her stress relief is creating recipes and feeding her family and anyone around her table, which I love. She loves spending time with her family, and though she isn't supposed to have favorites, everyone knows her grandson holds a very special place in her heart. That is so sweet. Julie, thank you so much for for just being with us on the podcast and sharing your story and sharing your time with us today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Great. Well, tell us a little bit about who you are. We heard a little bit from Isaac. Again, if you haven't listened to the conversation with Isaac, go back and listen to it as well, because this is kind of a part 2 to that conversation that we had, where he introduced you a little bit, told a little bit about your family. But I'd love from your perspective, just tell us who you are and what your background is and what you get to do.
Sure. So I've been married to my husband for almost 31 years. And we were just like any couple who got married and, had their plans to start a family and things didn't go like we thought they were going to go kind of thing. So we are both teachers. For most of our careers have worked at the same school. So our lives have been very intertwined, even outside of the home. When we were young, not newly married, but young, in our marriage, we decided it was time to have children, and we just, it had really, I think now I know more and there's been more research done, but at that time kind of an unexplained infertility. So we tried to conceive for 4 years and couldn't. And after 4 years, did, but just had 1 miscarriage after another for another 3 years. I think my count at that point was like 9 miscarriages. So at some point, my doctor just looked at me, and I want to back up and say this. I think you hear a lot of adoptive parents say this. We always felt like we were going to adopt anyway. Yeah, I think you hear, and I don't know if that's just God's way of preparing you for some things that it's not so shocking when the time comes. I don't know, but
somewhere in there tucked away.
What's that?
It's kind of somewhere in there tucked away, but not at the forefront, but somewhere deep down. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I had my doctor after all of these miscarriages and everything just said to me one day, if you want a child now, I don't have answers for you. I can only recommend adoption at this point. We had decided not to go with a lot of infertility treatments like IVF or anything like that since it was unexplained. So we didn't know, if I went through all of that and still had miscarriages, that we just decided not to go that route because of that. So we, when he said that, it was very bittersweet. But also I think I am someone who, whatever I'm anxious about or whatever thing is happening in our lives, I can get a little obsessive. And so it kind of gave me something else to obsess over. So I can just leave this infertility thing in the past and let's go ahead and look at adoption. That was a little bit short-lived because as anyone who's been through infertility knows, adoption is not a cure for pregnancy.
Yeah.
And so that that kind of excitement of having something else to look for. It's kind of cyclical.
Mhm.
I'd say in my life. And so we did start looking. My husband, I was ready, like, let's start looking right away. I'm the
Mhm.
impulsive one. He's the really slow one, the very, very more thoughtful. And I don't remember how many months it was. It was a while before I finally just called the adoption agency one day and said, my husband's not ready, but I kind of feel like if we could ask some detailed questions, it would calm
Yeah.
his soul some. So we went in to the Bethany Christian Services on May 9th, 2000. Yeah, 2000. And um, our son Isaac, had been dropped off that day at their offices there. And he was a month before his second birthday. And they knew exactly what they were doing when they said, now we know you're just asking questions and you're not ready, but this is an example of a type of child.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And they showed us just the most beautiful, smiling little toddler boy. And when we left there, I said to my husband, I know you're not ready, but I feel like that child is my son right away from that first look. Picture at the picture. If you don't feel that way, tell me now. And he said, no, 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 I'm not ready. But he actually had the same feelings and didn't want to, just we'd had so much pain. He just didn't want to get
Yeah,
my hopes up.
yeah.
It felt impossible to go in one day and then that day say, here's the child.
That sounds
Kind of thing.
crazy. That sounds
Yeah.
crazy to anyone else, you're just like,
Yeah.
"That's
We had not filled out
right."
the first paperwork or anything. Yeah.
Mhm.
So he called them the next day to say, is it even possible? And Isaac moved in with us exactly a month later on June 9th.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was miraculous. If anyone has gone through adoption, nothing happens that quickly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because it was pushed through, we missed out on a lot of training and a lot of
Mm.
things that we would have been doing had we had months or sometimes even years to prepare for that. So there was a bittersweet.
Yeah.
um,
And you're still grieving too, right? I mean, I assume that means, I don't wanna make assumptions, but I could imagine that the grief process from infertility, I mean, there's never a stopping point and then a starting point. No matter
yeah.
how quickly or slowly you do it, you're always bringing in those past experiences into
Right.
where you're
Mhm.
at. So, it's a
Yeah,
whirlwind.
it is. It definitely was a whirlwind. And we, yeah, the grief. I was telling someone even recently, I'm past my childbearing years and, not looking for that to ever happen again. But even now, constantly when I'm hearing someone say, we're going to try to have kids at this time. And, no, not try. Well, we're going to have kids at this time. And this
Mhm.
is our life plan. I always have this thought in the back of my mind, oh, well, you don't know. Like, it doesn't happen that way. And then when it does for so many people,
Mhm.
I still, all of these, years later, have this sense of, well, my journey was not that way. And that's really painful. you know, that's
And the pain and the joy can happen simultaneously. It's something
right.
I'm kind of learning, is that just through life with our kids and,
Mhm.
watching and being with them in their grief over time, is that like joy and pain can coexist.
Right. Mhm.
It's sometimes hard to see that it does. But even
Right.
I think you went on to have biological children, correct?
I
Is that
did. I had still miscarriages all between
Mhm.
them all. With my first biological child, we even thought we lost her, and
Mm.
my doctor performed one more sonogram. We thought we had miscarried her as well, and he said, "Let's just do another sonogram." And I just will never forget him looking at me with tears and
Mm.
saying, "I see a heartbeat." Um, so I ended up on bed rest for most of the pregnancy with her. Um, and but yeah, we had three, lots of miscarriages, and then our baby. So Isaac's our oldest; he's 26, and then our youngest is 16. So a 10-year difference between our two
Okay.
adopted kids. Yeah.
Yeah. Share with me a little bit more about, so you shared a little bit up until Isaac comes. What happened after that? You mentioned you didn't have a whole lot of training up front, so you're just
Right.
kind of cast into the deep end.
Mhm.
Here is a child. You not a newborn, just jump into the toddler years where they're at. What was that like for you and your husband at the time?
So yeah, we had one day of training. That's all we had. And I think that today, that's just, again, something that seems crazy. So we had one day with him, and because we had not filled out any paperwork, they wanted us to have visitations and things like that to kind of get him acclimated to who we were. So we did visit with he and his foster mother at the agency initially, and then they let us the next week graduate to meeting them out in public somewhere. I went to their house once. That was just heart-wrenching time, because this might have been the third time that I had seen him, I think. And for whatever reason, I felt like my husband wasn't there. It was just me. And I think they were calling me Mommy Julie at that time, just to kind of help him with the transition. And when I went to leave, he sat in my lap the entire time. And when I went to leave, he cried and cried and cried. And so we had no legal rights to him. I couldn't take him with me. And I still say that might have ranks up there with one of the most difficult things I have ever done as a parent, was leaving him there that day with him just screaming for me to stay, kind of thing. I think about 2 weeks later, he was able to move in with us. But starting with a 2-year-old was a lot. We did not, like I said, did not have a lot of training. So, we never knew. I think we assumed a lot of things we saw with him as a toddler were just toddler things. When I went on to have more children, and even another adopted child that we adopted from birth, I can see that a lot of what we were dealing with Isaac in his toddler years were attachment issues that I just had not been, was not aware of. Things like that he, never saw anyone that he was afraid of, and was the life of the party from 2 years old on, But for a 2-year-old, like I said, we were teachers. He'd walk into a gym, a basketball game at our school, and just work the crowd. And cheerleaders would stop cheering, and he would be up in the bleachers talking to people. And we didn't realize how abnormal that was, and that was a huge red flag for attachment issues. And we wouldn't realize until later, much later, until he was a teenager, that he had really had massive attachment issues, and that he's still dealing with today. And because he had such a personable, smiling face, joyous personality, a lot of that was masked. And so he was suffering a lot internally all of those years, that we weren't aware of.
Yeah, and coping, right? I think it's easy as a parent, we know that attachment affects in so many different ways, sometimes that way, and sometimes they just become like an easy baby, right? They don't need anything. Oh my gosh, we have this perfect kid that just plays by himself and is, doesn't really seem to need us. How did we, hit the lottery with this great, wonderful kid? Yeah. Or the opposite, where they have a lot of, not necessarily the opposite, but they seem perfect in another way, or they're able to they're not afraid of anything.
Right.
I think it does get masked sometimes because we just don't have the eyes to see it until we know differently. Tell me a little bit about the trajectory of, how did you start to get training, or when did you start? You said later in his teenage years, you started to kind of piece things. I assume when he was able to start speaking, you may have started to notice a little bit more. What was that process like?
Yeah, so we started to realize when he was 7, he found his adoption papers and shredded them. So that was obviously a huge.
My heart.
Yeah, I still have them. I found them recently. They're the only adoption papers we have, so I kept them. So that was obviously our first sign. He started acting out in school. And we started to realize like there were maybe some learning disabilities, and just really struggled for a long time on how to categorize things. What is adoption related? What is maybe ADHD? What is learning disability related kind of thing?
Gosh.
Yeah. So and those are very common, statistically speaking. I've been told that that this is a very similar, familiar story for a lot of adoptive families because ADHD, learning disabilities, spectrum issues, different things like that can be genetic. And many times parents are in situations that they're in because they've struggled with these same things and, lack self-control or awareness or whatever. And so it is a very familiar story in the adoption world that what's adoption related, what is genetic related, all of these things. And
you want to get the right tool, right? You're trying to find the right tool for the right problem. And if you don't know the actual problem, it's very hard to find relief and help. Yeah.
So we were in a community that did not have the right tools. We were private school teachers in a private school. And I knew he was having behavioral issues at school. I did not realize how severe the academic and social issues were until we finally pulled him home because he was not getting the tools to help with the behavioral issues. So we decided, well, we're going to homeschool for a little bit so that we can try to figure out what's going on. And the first day I homeschooled him in third grade, I think it was, and he couldn't write a sentence. So I contacted his teacher from the previous year and said, what's going on? And she said, oh, I just used to sit him beside the top student and that student would help him throughout the day. So here was another thing that had been masked.
Band-Aid alert.
Right, yes. So poor Isaac, not only was he a guinea pig, he just, in every area of his life, there was so much masking and Band-Aids happening that many times we weren't alerted to until, later.
Yeah.
So we did end up homeschooling him and getting him specialized academic therapies and different things to try to pull him out of that. But for Isaac, I think it was one more thing that made him different. And he's in a white home in a white area, dark skin. So he just stood out everywhere he went. And now I'm homeschooled and I have academic issues. And I'm having to go to this academic therapy. So I feel like a lot of his early years were just a lot of, I'm so different from everyone that I'm around all the time. And obviously that was hard for him and hard for us because we knew that was happening, but we're also parents that these things were still real things that we had to take care of.
Yeah.
And just many times not knowing what do we sacrifice to help him with his identity and what can we not sacrifice because as parents, we just have to make sure we're doing good things for him.
Yeah.
And I'd say that's still my struggle.
That takes a lot of wisdom. It takes a lot of discernment to know how do I give them everything that they need? And what types of, school is not an easy decision, right? There's lots of, my husband and I, have been going through a very, very similar situation with learning challenges for two of our children. Mm-hmm. And some of it is we had to just write out what are our values with education? What's the top and what trumps that top? And when does that top get trumped? And there is no perfect situation here. So we're really having to discern how do we get what this child needs in order to learn. And it sometimes it shuffles things up, in a way that you didn't anticipate having to shuffle. And then maybe for you, it has been for us. You're looking around at all your friends who are navigating some, their own school situation, but very, very differently and with very different needs and things in the mix. And so it's just hard, it takes a lot of wisdom.
I've often just had the thought, why, I look at my sisters and their kids and it's they've never thought for 1 second. They just sent them to the local school. I'm how come it can't be that easy?
I'm confident that journey, as we know, working through hard things always produces something. It's not meaningless. Yeah. And so it made you a more discerning parent. And not that that's not to put that aside, It's not that people that don't have to walk through that don't. Well,
everybody has their thing.
So everyone has their situation that they're having to work through. But there's meaning and it's cultivating something, and has cultivated something and led you on a path that other people aren't on, and that's okay.
But and then of course as we're walking through all of that, just not finding a lot of support. one of our decisions for pulling him home from school was that one of his teachers, when I went to them and said, he's acting out, he's having these struggles. We found that he ripped up his adoption papers, and her answer was, well, maybe you just shouldn't let him dwell on that. Maybe he just shouldn't be able to talk about that anymore. Because it's him dwelling. And I think she meant well by that. She was saying, don't obsess, like, the whole be thankful for the life you have now kind of thing. That is so traumatic for adopted kids.
Now we know better.
Right. Yeah. But I would say his life, his schooling years and on into being a teenager, just not a lot of grace in his life. And I always like to say this, adoption begins with a death. It's a death of a relationship. And I don't think that people outside of adoption see it as that way or understand it as that way. And so I would say if someone were interacting with a child who had lost a biological mother, there's all the grace in the world offered, rightly so. They should be offering that, but that adopted kids don't receive that same acknowledgement and grace. And so that was a very difficult road for Isaac, I think, because it was lots of internal struggles going on and just not very many safe places to expose that.
Were there any, you mentioned some resources and some situations that weren't super helpful. Were there any that stood out to you that were helpful, that whether it was just a person or if it was just one little tool that started a trajectory of like, wait, maybe there are things out here that maybe we just don't know about?
Yeah. So first of all, just lived experiences. So I think that's one reason that Isaac and I love working with identity, is just because other people's stories just are balm. It's like a balm to my soul sometimes, because it's such a lonely path. Because of the lack of grace and things, it's just a very, very lonely path. And so hearing other people's stories are incredibly encouraging to me, so that we, try to be in community with as many adopted families as we could for our boys. Yeah. When we went to adopt our son Micah, that was a private adoption. So again, not a ton of training, just what we had to have for our home study. But they did require us to read a few books, and I'm going to forget the titles of those books now. One was Adoption Blues, which I haven't seen it around lately, but okay, that was an incredible book because it just talked about how you have the adoption blues that are very similar to postpartum blues, like the postpartum depression. So obviously it's not hormonal, but our bodies are on this high and we're adopting this child, and then reality sits in almost immediately and there's a crash of what you've taken on, and just how very common adoption blues set in. And that was an incredibly helpful book to my husband and I. And I cannot believe the other book that I read. I don't know. I do remember reading, it's actually a James Dobson book, who is not someone that I follow or books of his that I read a lot, but it was just a quote of his in a book. I think someone must have given us the book as a gift or something. I don't know. But he had a chapter on adoption in there. I think it was the only chapter I read in the book. But he started the chapter with the first rule of parenting an adopted child is to throw all the rules out the window. Yeah. And so I think really surrounding ourselves with people who understood that and who loved us and our children, because they were going to be that safe place and offer that grace that our kids needed during that time. Taking advantage of respite care. I know many adoption agencies, for years, like you can adopt an infant and come back 10 years later and say, we're really struggling now. And they, offer respite care and things for the kids and things that was also very helpful to us as well. Yeah. And I would say any resource that was helpful to us were things that just encouraged us that we weren't alone. And that, we didn't have to be embarrassed about behavioral issues. We didn't have to, hide things about our family.
Yeah. That's so good. That feeling seen and being able to be who you are in a safe place is, especially when you're kind of lonely in it, it makes all the difference in the world. You mentioned identity. Can you tell me a little bit about how all of that aspect of the story came into to be? Again, Isaac shared a little bit of his perspective on how all of that happened and what his experience was like. What was that like for you, and how did the journey with identity come to be?
Yeah. So as a teenager, I think I said earlier, we live in a very white community. um, and so, especially when he was growing up, we live in the suburbs. And so you could go for weeks without seeing someone of color if you didn't go into the city area.
Mhm.
And so, he just, again, just, very different always where he was. And so he really started to struggle. And my husband and I were in the middle of still raising, he's the oldest. So then we had 4 more kids after him. So we have 5 within
Right.
10 years, really 8 years, because he was 2 when we got him. So 5 kids within 8 years. And so we were busy and, building businesses and, whatever, just very, very busy. And so I think we became a little lazy in, thinking, what can we do to create for Isaac a community that looks like him?
Yeah.
When we first adopted him, we were in an area that was very diverse. So we didn't have to do anything to create that. We went to a church that was diverse. There was an older lady there that kind of took him in, an older Black lady, and she would take him home many Sundays after church and to any of her family celebrations and invite his sisters, sometimes, and myself. And so we didn't have to create that when we first adopted him for several years. And then we moved to an area that was not diverse at all at a time when we were probably the busiest in our married lives. And so we underestimated the amount of energy that it takes to create that
Yeah.
for transracially adopted kids. So that's kind of what Isaac experienced as a teenager. And Isaac's always been as happy and as much of a people person as he is. He is also very inward thinking and a loner. And so he was suffering a lot alone.
Mhm.
His generation is kind of the first that grew up with the internet. So we were a little naive about how young and how quickly they could get information. So he tells the story, I don't know if he did on your podcast or not, of how he first started learning about the Black community on the internet,
Yeah.
probably at like 14 or 15 years old.
Mhm.
Obviously, you learn from your first, and we kept that away, from our younger kids, and they didn't have the access that he did. But he started learning a lot about that, and so he started to like really think, am I that different from my parents? Do they love me? Um, am I supposed to like white people? Am I not? Are my parents
Yeah.
racist? All of those things, because he's getting it all from like Tumblr and MySpace and things like that. So obviously that was pretty detrimental to him. And so we went through a phase, I would say from about 15 to 17 or 18, just really angry with us, doing everything he could to push us away. Like, I've got attachment issues. I'm not lovable. I'm different from everyone that I've been around. And I know nothing about my culture.
Mm.
I'm going to prove to them all of these things. And so anything he was raised in, he was just pushing it away. So, just putting it in our face, pushing us away constantly. I remember one argument with him in particular where I just said to him, Isaac, one day you're going to have to realize you can never win this battle. Because when we adopted you for life. And there's not, I'm going to cry when I say this, sorry. But there's
Of course.
nothing you can do to push me away. I will never stop loving you, ever. There's nothing you can do. Stop trying to push me away. And I think it was around that time and we just, every time he would come to us with something that he would think was going to shock us, my husband was so great. He would just say, okay, all right. That gives us something to talk about now, kind of thing. Because because I can be the more emotional parent. So we learned that my husband's response had to always be the first response
Mhm.
when he would do that. It was around that time as well that my husband and I realized we needed not only adoptive mentors in our lives, but Black mentors in our lives, because we had missed a whole portion of Isaac's life. And so we started searching out for Black mentors. And so we started reading all of the books he was reading, unbeknownst to him. Like we weren't doing it as a, look what we're doing, we're trying. We wanted to see, where's he coming from? So we started reading all of the books he was reading. My daughter, who was a senior in high school when things really came to a head, did the same thing. She started reading everything. There was a guy, Black professor, who was mentoring Isaac. And so we reached out to him and said, can we talk to you? Can you help us out here? And he was crucial in our relationship with Isaac. And he and his wife became dear friends of ours. And he just told us one day, if you want a relationship when he's 30, you've got to stop fighting him. He knows every area that you disagree with him on. You raised him in such a way that he knows what your passions are. He knows what you hold dear. He knows exactly where you disagree with him. You never, ever have to tell him that again. And that was a changing point in our relationship with Isaac. And we have always raised our kids, because of our two adopted kids, with a sense of anything's on the table, you can tell us anything kind of thing. Like we wanted that trust. I think that became even more deeper at that point. And we started to see trust growing between us. I mean, it was years. I mean,
it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. But
I could imagine that just being so heavy and such a burden to carry, and yet at the same time it's your child. So in some ways you don't see it as a burden. It's just you're trying to connect. You're doing everything you can, and the things that kind of scream out at me in that is, one, this idea, what you said is you can't fully push me away. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, and the sense of belonging that like you're more than just being you're not just an adopted kid to us. You're our child, but also not just being lip service for you guys. You can say all those things, but if you're not willing to take steps in his direction, to come toward and to welcome his thoughts and to truly in action, be able to say, I'll learn. There are things here, like there's a humility there that I think is honestly really rare, especially in society in general, but also in these spaces. It's such a polarizing topic. It's a scary topic in our society. It's a lot of finger pointing and it's so scary to step into, because especially when you're like, I don't have the first clue because I've never had to step into these spaces.
Yeah.
But to step in and say, we're going to learn, and posture yourself in that way, I'm sure that alone started you off on a healthy trajectory.
Yeah. And I think it was hard, he was old enough to even see some of the pain eventually that we were going through, because we lost friends, kind of thing.
How did that happen? Just because you're
within a conservative church community, these kinds of things aren't popular. These thoughts are not popular thoughts. And so I think, when we would stand firm for him, or, say, we're reading these books, or we're looking into this or whatever, it just was not a very popular thought. So our community kind of for a while was shaken up over that. And I think he felt bad, like he never rejoiced in that for us. But at the same time, I think it was part of his feeling like, okay, they go to bat for me.
It's costing them something.
Yeah.
And they're willing, I'm worth the cost to them.
And he didn't even realize, actually, until we've been doing these speaking engagements together and things, how often my husband and I were advocating for him as a teenager. We would go to school boards and different things about, policies that we thought were racist policies, or, taking up for him in different ways, and thinking that we were protecting him for that. And we were in a sense, but then also it meant that when he turned 18 and left our protection, he wasn't quite prepared for what it meant to be a Black man in America. And
Mhm.
so there's a very fine line between protection and education during that
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
That's
But I
a
think even that, as he still finds out more and more about that, now it's just more and more like, oh my, like they were doing more than I thought they were, kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. What motivated you to do all of that, to step in, to give up friends, to do whatever had to be done?
My boy, he's my child. That my children tease me that I have a vicious mama bear in me for all of my children. And I was the only voice that he had. And, as any mother can attest to, when your children hurt, you hurt right along with them. And
Oh, yeah.
it's just what I was
I'm
feeling.
getting
Sorry, I'm
teary.
crying.
I know. Goodness.
Yeah.
You're getting me all, yeah, I get it. From a mom to a mom, I get that 100%. It is,
Yeah.
it's fierce. And you want them to know that they're worth it all. They're worth going to bat for.
Yeah. But then back to your original question, through all of that, this is when identity was born. And Isaac by himself just thought, I struggle with identity so much. I know I'm not the only one. So he started, while he was really still angry with us, it's when it first started. And he was doing more consulting and things at that point. I think less, actually, we weren't very involved because he didn't want us to be involved at that point. So I won't speak a lot to us what he was doing then, because I don't know a lot. But I think it was more consulting and less like speaking and training and things like he's doing now. But as our relationship has healed, a few years ago, he brought me in for the first time just to speak about our story together. And we're just realizing how much that resonates with people, because our story is so incredibly similar to so many adoptive families. Yeah. Our story is, it's not unique. It's not a unique story.
It's not a unique story, but I think the fact that the tool that and the conversations that you're willing to have
that might be the unique
are
story.
rare.
Yeah.
There's not many out there. I've looked for them. When I came across what Isaac was doing, I was just like, I desperately need this in my own life. And I know others in our community need it. And everyone's just trying to support one another, and but not really knowing where to turn. Some of it is just being able to have the courage to listen to our kids. Yeah. That's right. Readily available, but being able to navigate their questions and help them get what they need is, it's not an easy, there's no path that's been laid out.
Yeah. And as adoptive parents, you should be providing trust and safety and security to your kids. And I think we all have to step back at some point and say, that's on me as a parent. That's not on the child. And so and my actions are providing those things or not providing those things. Yeah. And I think that's something as adoptive parents we owe to our children, is to examine ourselves and apologize when we're not providing that. And do better. Yeah.
Being willing to make that repair happen and to actually initiate it. It's not an easy
it's
thing.
Hard. I mean, a lot of this comes out in teenage years. Teenagers still need to be disciplined, right? It's I always tell him, it's like, you put me in a really bad position when you ran our car into our house when you didn't even have a driver's license. Because trying to discipline actions like that for kids who are already struggling with identity, struggling with attachment, and just, it's hard. It's all very hard. And then trying to realize, and you're going to get it wrong sometimes, when do I need to sacrifice the discipline and just love them, kind of thing.
Yeah, that takes a lot of wisdom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned just things that you were kind of on the topic already, but things that you would have done differently on your journey. As we kind of talked about before we actually started recording, every parent, I think we look back and say, man, I wish I had done that differently, regardless of adoption or not, right? There are no perfect parents. There are no perfect people. And raising kids is just hard. And we can all look back and hopefully not become guilt-ridden, but look back and say, man, I would have done that differently had I known. Is there anything that you really point to as kind of the major ones? We all have lots of them, but are there anything in particular that you said, I really would have done this differently had I known?
Yeah, I would have, we certainly would have put more effort into providing an atmosphere where he could be around people who looked like him more.
Mm.
That was a huge mistake on our part. That's a hard way. He and I would answer that particular question about that very differently. And it'll be interesting to see, once he is a parent now, but, once he's a parent of an adult child, if he would, I don't know, but I look at that question and I hear people say, if you're going to adopt a child, you need to be willing to move to another neighborhood. You need to be willing to move to different churches or different schools. And in a perfect world, and no pun intended, but in a black and white world where there aren't other issues, I would agree. Yes, that's the kind of sacrifice you need to be able to make. But, depending upon what your passions are in life, what the things that you hold dear, like you were saying earlier with the education, what are the things that we're not willing to sacrifice? That's not always a black and white answer, right? So, if I were Jewish, would I be willing to sacrifice going to the synagogue to go to a more diverse church so that my, black child could worship with people who looked like him? Probably not, kind of thing. And so there are questions like that you really have to ask yourself and examine. And I would say sometimes we got that wrong and sometimes we got that right. But generally speaking, we messed up in the sense that we didn't provide enough of sacrifices that way for him to be around people who look like him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard. And being able to make those kinds of choices when there's a child under your roof, and having to, sacrifice, but maintain a boundary that because me not sacrificing absolutely all the things in the way that you anticipate does not mean that I don't then love you and going to bat for you. None of that changes, right. But there is boundaries are still a real thing. And, being able to maintain a family unit and maintain, your values and things like that. That's hard because you're still parenting, right. You're still parenting your child and you're still trying to maintain, morals and values and all the things that you're doing while also giving them everything that you need. And like you said, it's not just black and white. It's not just this or that. It's very complex, right? And you're trying to do the best that you can, but I 100% agree. Trying to find those things, it doesn't just happen. I would assume, it doesn't happen in our community. Where if you're looking for those types of opportunities, you have to go find them.
And that would be a piece of advice I'd have for anyone who's looking at adoption, any kind of transracial adoption. It takes a lot of work beyond just the day-to-day parenting, but to create those cultures for them, it is completely on you as the parent. It's your responsibility, and it is very much easier said than done because it doesn't happen organically.
Practically speaking, what are some of the things that I know you didn't do all of them when they were super young, but on a practical level, are there specific things that you did or wish that you had done, just kind of to give some handles to what that actually means?
Yeah. So of course, when Isaac was young, we had the lady that took him from church. And so he was with her family a lot, for any birthdays and holidays, she would have him. And that, I wish that I had thought that out when we moved, because that was really good for him. It was good for my daughter to see that happening. It was good for me to see the different cultures and how, things are celebrated and things like that. So I wish that I had sought that out. So it was a good thing we did when he was little. Wish that I had sought that out as he was older. With my youngest, he is actually Polynesian. He is adopted from Hawaii. So I've done a better job with him of, recipes, and for Christmas, buying him Hawaiian candies and, different things like that, buying him, different paraphernalia. And, he wants to look at the Hawaiian language. He's still in high school, so we're looking at where we can find that. I took him the 2021. One of my kids graduated high school, and because everything had been taken away from the senior year from them. So my sister and I, who also had a graduate, decided we were going to take the two of them on a senior trip together, and we chose Hawaii. And then I said, well, I can't not take my Hawaiian son with me,
Right.
if we're doing that. So he went with us, and that I just so wish that I had had some kind of opportunity to do something like that with Isaac. Micah just was so proud of being Hawaiian and showing that off to his brother and his cousin, and
That's so cool.
Doing the palace tour and hearing all of the history behind that and how Hawaii became a state, and like he just soaked that in. I think he was, he was 13 at that time, just soaking it all in, and just so much pride and all of that.
It's a piece of them, it's
Yeah.
it's a piece that they don't get to express very often.
So I was able to take him to the hospital that he was born in and meet the people that helped facilitate his adoption, and just all of those things that Isaac did not get to have. And so it's been a wonderful experience for Micah that way, and I wish that we had had more of that kind of experience for Isaac. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One particular question that I have, and just because it's come up a little bit just as we've been thinking through this, our adopted sons are 9 and 6, so they're still pretty young, but have lots of questions, and we're in the midst of working it out. And then we have 2 other biological kiddos in the mix as well. But one of the things as we've been thinking through it has been, you mentioned the lady that kind of took him in and, on Sundays and things like that. And in those circumstances, he's going on his own, right, into this culture, kind of without you. Well, definitely without you.
Yes.
And there's, I think, a place for that. And then, as we talk about like looking for African-American festivals and things like that, if we go as a family, he still stands out as different because we're all there, you know? And so I've had a lot of thoughts around how do I do this for you while still being in your circle, but not being something that still makes you different. And how to navigate that. You're in a Black community, but you're with a white family. And so you still stand out. Have you tried to navigate that?
Yeah, actually I was hoping that would come up, because there was a time when Isaac, where that's true, where he was still standing out. So he didn't like that. And then also there was a time when he didn't like going with other Black families because it made him realize what he was missing. And so we had a bit of an awkward few years around the age of probably 9, 10 years old, where that was kind of awkward for him. So we found a lot of adoptive families because we thought these are people who look like you. And we thought that was a good answer, but I hear him say often now, my only Black friends were other adopted kids.
Right.
So,
yeah. And there's not a perfect scenario there maybe, but maybe it's a variety.
Yeah. And I think that's what I landed on, was just like exposing him to it in every way. And knowing though, and this is what you'll hear he and I say often, adoption is just hard. Adoption is born out of trauma. And anything born out of trauma is never going to be perfect. And so that's where that trust, security and safety comes in. It's just like it's never going to be perfect. There are always going to be things that don't work out well. And so they have to know that they can trust us. Yeah.
That trust is key. And the continuing to be able to fight and talk about that, it's not necessarily the way it was the way it was meant to be in a certain sense. It was also not the way it was meant to be in a certain sense. And so we can sit with you and we can walk through this and we can give space to ask questions and give you as much of an answer as I possibly can, and know that it's not enough, and then sit with you in the grief around that. I definitely have felt, especially in the last couple of years, the grief and the joy kind of waxing and waning in the same ball, there's so much joy in adoption, and I don't ever want to downplay the joy that my kids give to us and to our family and to me, in being able to be their mom. at the same time, there is this other grief aspect that I know that they are walking through and that we all experience as a family because of that, because they do. And so there's no perfect place for all of those things. They're just kind of all moving together at once all the time. And so I've learned that there's a level of just being at peace with that, and living with it, and being open to learning through that process, and grieving when it's time to grieve, and celebrating when it's time to celebrate. I don't know. I wish I'm the type of person like you, I want to put everything in its place.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The fact that it doesn't have a perfect place is just, it's always a little bit hard.
It is. And that's, we did a podcast not long ago on Adoption Day celebrations for this very reason. We never called it Gotcha Day because I had a relationship with both of our birth mothers. And for whatever reason, I can't voice why, but I always felt like that seemed disrespectful to them.
I've never been okay with that term. I don't know. People use it. It's fine. We don't use the term.
So we've just always called it Adoption Day, and we've never done gifts or anything like that, but it's just a day where we're going to fix you a nice family meal. If you want to have friends over, you can. If you don't, you don't. I think Isaac chose a couple of times to have like family, like our family's best friends, the whole family would come over kind of thing. Micah has done the same thing, I think. But it's just a day where we all show you how incredibly thankful you are that you're part of our home. But it's not this big celebration of, well, this was the day that lots of trauma happened to you. And, kind of
also not okay.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's just we don't really focus on the fact of the adoption, really. It's just you're on a pedestal today, and we want you to know how much we really love you. And if you want to cry on Adoption Day at our family meal, you can. Like that joy and that sadness and pain. Like you said, it's okay to exist at the same time. Yeah.
Every year we've been kind of asking the kids, how do you want to celebrate Adoption Day this year? Because we don't want to assume that what we did last year is still what they want to do this year. Because things change, and just allowing for them to feel differently on different years and on different days about it. And one thing that's been neat, we typically just go to dinner. We have a dinner, and then we ask them who they want to invite. We usually go out to dinner for various reasons, but one year in particular, there's always kind of something that happens. But one year I think we were at Maggiano's, and happened to mention that we were celebrating Adoption Day. It's obvious, right, in our family, that we're celebrating things like that. But the waitress happened to be an adoptive child, now adult, and said just really loved that we did that. But also it was almost like a way to celebrate her as well. That was just an added blessing that we just didn't expect. So.
Oh, that's so sweet. Yeah. We always laugh though, because Isaac, like he's the ultimate kid that was going to be all about me, kind of thing. And so he's the kid whose birthday would turn from one day to a week to like birthday month.
Yeah.
And we were laughing recently. I was like, we never did gifts for Adoption Day, but then one year you just said, now for Adoption Day this year, I want whatever. And so then he got gifts for
wait till Christmas.
Yeah.
Something was on the radar that he wanted. That was Christmas was too far away.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many things, and we could talk for many more hours, but I'm sure people listening are like, okay, that's time to wrap it up. But I like to finish out our time just with the last 5 questions, more kind of, not as heavy, more rapid fire questions about who you are. And the first one is, what's a hobby you've always wanted to pick up but never have?
Okay, I'm going to sound really lame, but knitting.
That's not lame.
I want to create Afghans and things, and I try, and then it never, I always give up. So, yeah.
It's something I think you have to have a lot of time for, which is probably why we always associate things like knitting with like the older seasons and, later seasons in life, because you have the time. And now as you've got a grandbaby, you got things to do.
Yeah, but I want to
maybe
knit
one day.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, hopeful that's going to happen for you.
Yeah.
What's your favorite place you've ever visited and why?
I think it's Hawaii, and I know that sounds, cliche because it's Hawaii, but it's all about. I've only been there because of my son, and
Mhm.
so just because I have so many sentimental memories there, and
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for the people there. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's a really cool place.
yeah.
If you could relive one day of your life, what would it be and why?
If I could relive one day of my life, it would always center around any of my children. I think that it would be the day of Isaac's, the day that we got Isaac, the day that he came to live with us.
Yeah.
Because he was our first child. So there was that anxiety, their first adoption. So a lot of anxiety. There's just a lot of anxiety around that day. And so
Mhm.
I would love to, but then on the flip side, the school that Bruce and I worked for gave us a big surprise shower, and our car was loaded down with clothes and toys and things. So there was a lot of joy and acceptance in that day. But I feel like it's a day that I remember full of anxiety. So I would love to redo that and just savor every moment of it. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. What is your go-to comfort food?
Leftover spaghetti.
Okay, leftover. Very specific. Not just fresh spaghetti, but
Always
leftovers.
better the next day. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, my whole family knows if we have leftover spaghetti, if they get to it before me, I will lose my temper.
That's so good. Pasta is one of those things that keeps
Yeah.
very well. Pasta and maybe soup. Something that has to kind of marinate a little bit more, but
Yeah.
it's good. What's one thing that you're deeply proud of, but you don't get to talk about very often?
It has to do, it would always go back to my children, I think. Or
Mhm.
maybe the fact that in all of our grief, maybe it's this actually, in all of our grief over infertility and miscarriages and adoption trauma, and then grief that just our family has had, we've had a lot of grief in our life, that my husband and I still have a marriage that is
Mm,
intact, not always perfect, but one that we're
Sure.
committed to and still continue to lean on one another after almost 31 years. And,
Yeah.
and a lot of people can't say that if you would look at all the trauma our family has been through. And so I'm proud of that.
That's an amazing one. It really is. And we could have a whole other conversation about marriage in the midst of all of these things, and how do you stay on the same page with discipline and all the things that get thrown out the window when you're talking about adoption and all of this. So yeah, I am proud of that. I hope that we are in the same boat. I am very confident that we will be, because we have great people in our life that support us and care for us and can't do it by ourselves. But yeah, that is something to but very much be proud of. Yeah.
Mhm.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Julie, thank you so much, truly, for spending some time. It has been just a balm for my soul to talk to you, just to hear and be on a journey with another, adoptive mom who's a little bit further down the road is always just so incredible for me, and I'm sure so many people that are listening. So thank you
Thank
for
you so much.
being willing to share about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
To those listening, we hope these conversations have inspired you to find your place along the river. And we welcome you to join us in bringing hope and renewal to the city of Houston. If you'd like more information on how to get involved, please visit riversideproject.org and submit a contact form. We'll see you next time.